Once again, greetings everyone. We're very happy and excited to have you. Princeton and Harvard are playing basketball right now, so thank you for choosing us over them. Today we're very honored to have Dr. Aasim Padela as part of our continuing Islamic Conversation series. As many of you know, our Islamic Conversation series is at least once a month, a chance for Muslim scholars and artists and thinkers to come to the university and engage with the wider campus and the wider community on critical issues that we're facing today in the modern world. So Dr. Aasim Padela is an assistant professor of medicine in the sections of emergency medicine and general internal medicine at the University of Chicago. He also serves as the director of the Initiative on Islam and Medicine at the Program on Medicine and Religion, and as faculty at the McLean Center for Clinical Medical Ethics at the University of Chicago. Dr. Padela's scholarship focuses on the intersection of religion, ethics, and minority health through the experiences of American Muslim patients and healthcare providers. So we're very honored and blessed to have him. Without further ado, Dr. Aasim Padela.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم النبيين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا بما ينفعنا وينفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. بسم الله. Assalamu alaikum. My own greetings I convey to you all. We should start this talk by showing gratitude and thanks to those who have allowed this to happen. So I'm sure that Papa John's and staff there at Papa John's should be thanked for the food that they have provided you all. But behind this, I would like to thank Suhaib and his wife, who are here, is actually the master planner behind Suhaib, for inviting me to come here and to share some thoughts with you, inshallah. So unlike the khutbah, this is going to be more interactive, as it should be. I'm going to share with you for about maybe 20 minutes some thoughts. You're going to share with me some thoughts, You're going to share with me some thoughts, then I'll reflect upon those thoughts, inshallah. And just first within that, perhaps you might come to some greater understanding of what I'm supposed to speak about, which is Islamic biomedical ethics, concepts and controversies. So with that said, inshallah, I'm going to just fill out this board so that I know where I need to go. And we're going to start by asking a couple questions of you all. So first, I'd like to know in the audience, how many of you are actually undergrad? Can you just raise your hand? Okay. How many of you are post-undergrad? That should be the rest of the people. Alright, so we can't do interaction, they're just going to be like this. Okay, so actually, let me ask, who is related to the medical field here? Okay, good. And who has no idea about medicine at all? Alright, good. Alright, alhamdulillah. So with that said, let me ask you to help me fill out this board. So we're going to talk about Islamic biomedical ethics. And so I'm wanting to ask, what are the materials of Islamic bioethics? Right. So for those who are in the medical field, you have an issue, and you want to figure out what Islamic bioethics has to say about that. Where do you go? What are the materials of Islamic bioethics? You shout it out, because you got to fill out this board, otherwise I'm going to talk about it.
What do you mean by material?
So you need to go and figure out Islamic bioethics, right? Someone's not going to come talk to you about Islamic bioethics, but you need to figure out what Islamic bioethics is. Where would you go?
Google. You start with the same basics as any Islamic-oriented
Sure.
question. So
No. That's true. So we can talk about sources of knowledge. What I meant was that a material. So you want to research Islamic bioethics, right? So your sources could be the texts. We'll put that up, texts like the Quran, sacred texts. What are other sources to understand what Islamic bioethics is? Scholars. Okay, good. Please specify what you mean by scholars.
Specialist in Islamic ethics.
Further specify what.
You.
So I don't know anybody with the title of a specialist in Islamic ethics. So you must have something in your mind.
A scholar of Islamic
So you're Mufti Faqih. Eh?
Mufti Faqih who has familiarity with these questions.
Okay. So. Okay, next.
Islamic Medical Association.
Good. I'm just going to put Imana down here. This has one, but you don't have to agree with it. But medical associations. More. If they're in. Okay, good. So we don't I'll put one down. Maybe books. Maybe. There will have some titles, I think. But.
Position statements and other literature.
Right. So I'll put that in first category. Good. So we have material. Producers. So here are some things I'm going to overlap, so let's move them over. So people who write on or produce materials, right? So you have the scholar mufti, we can move that over. Who writes those sorts of, well, I mean, the Quran, I guess you could say Allah and the Nabi, maybe, alright? I don't mean Nabi wrote it, don't say that, I didn't say that, I just said Allah, alright, you know what I mean. Alright, Imana, physicians, okay. Books, alright, so I put that up there, so you got to divine what I was saying, what I meant by that. Books, who writes those books?
Scholars, historians.
Historians, good. More? People.
Scholars.
Jurists.
Scholars is a term that's used for everybody, so that's what I'm saying. Scholars, you could be scholar. He meant scholar mufti, right? So you could say scholar. Exegete. Musannaf. Mudarris.
No, meaning someone who is teaching.
Okay. Mufassir. Alright, so good. So you didn't know what to say because I didn't tell you what I meant. Okay, so let's put like this idea of PhDs, sociologists, or like social scientists, or Islamic studies people. I think are different than Mufti Faqih. Okay. All right. So now the other category is consumers. So we have Islamic bioethics. This is the material. Those are the producers. Who are the consumers? Meaning who is on the ground interested in this material? Physicians, okay.
Chaplains.
Chaplains, yeah. I was waiting for how long it would take for someone to say chaplain. Look, you're not a material producer, just so you know. Alright. More?
Medical researcher.
Researcher, good.
I think someone said students.
Students, meaning students in the academy, students are in medicine.
Studying to be a doctor.
Good, okay. So, students, patients, good.
And their families.
Families, yeah, okay. Any more?
Governments.
Good, now how?
Policy.
Very good. You get a star. Alright. So health policy stakeholders. How? Tell me how. You'll get double stars.
How are they consumers?
Yeah. Why? Why would they look to this material?
Policy. I mean, policy that they have to enact.
Like.
I mean, rights.
Alright, so I'll get
Patient rights, things like
good.
that.
Okay, so I'll get it. That's good. So that's critical. Okay. Now the last category I want you to fill out is what are the goals? So we have material, we have people who write, or whatever. That's not all people. Anyway, we have producers, we have consumers. What's the goal of all this? That's why I was trying to make you segue into that. But what's the goal?
I think every consumer probably has different goals.
Good. So help me think about that. So MDs, what's the goal for MDs?
So an MD would want to know, how to advise.
Not to get sued? Is that what
How
to? Yes, if you know Islamic biomedical ethics, then therefore you will not be approached by any lawyers to. No, you're saying so?
How to advise patients' families.
Good.
How to advise patients. What forms of treatments and to what degree should be offered.
Okay, so advice given to patients and others, good. The advice to what end? So you give medical advice. To what end?
mean, just in terms of a day-to-day basis, just to be able to, you offer a patient a certain form of treatment, and they look to you. They look to you to understand what the benefits and outcomes are, and when it comes to, especially in terms of end-of-life issues, benefits and outcomes often revolve around personal and religious and moral beliefs. So in order to advise for each particular treatment, we should understand what that patient and their religious goals are.
Religious goals, okay.
So,
Closer, we're getting there, yeah? So in the sense that, medical benefit and harm, right, equals, says opposition maybe equals quality of life, questionable extension of life. So your advice on this matter equals what?
Right, that's the question.
Very okay. So she's good.
Right, because medical outcomes are different than emotional outcomes, and there are other forms of outcomes, I guess I'm trying to say.
Okay, so we're gonna get on this. Anybody have any thoughts?
metaphysical goals.
Metaphysical goals. MashaAllah. Okay. Specify.
How you wish to sort of be when you meet your Lord.
Specify. Just say it. Just say it.
So, for example,
Don't couch it in some academic discourse. Just say it.
I mean, I'd have to give a specific example. Nothing's coming to mind. But for example, if you want to do organ transplantation and you want to use a pig's heart,
Sure.
and you know that a pig is considered an impure sort of animal in the Islamic sort of metaphysical understanding of things. So can you use a pig's heart? If you think that God does not permit you to do that, then it's a problem when you meet your Lord. If you think God does permit you to do that, then you can go ahead and have that.
Alright, so let me rephrase maybe in some plain speaking. Maybe are you trying to say that you want to know whether such thing is obligated upon you or not, and whether vis-a-vis that obligation that raises or reduces your station in the afterlife?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Alright. So otherworldly goals, right? So that's what you said, I think, something like that. So afterlife goal, station, outlook. Okay. Anything else? And there's one more thing I'm thinking about, and then we'll get into more of the mic speaking. Anything else? Yeah.
It could also be affected by how much the physician themselves are willing to offer, in terms of possibly abortion or and things like that.
So the goal of Islamic bioethics would be to
physicians would be concerned with it so that they know how much they personally are willing to offer their patient.
so regulate the behavior of physicians who are faithful, huh?
Yes.
Okay. Sure, regulation of behavior. Alright. You can say the same thing potentially about patients. I think that's what Sahar was trying to say. Okay. Alright. Good.
And I would say also, as a general goal for society to sort of establish goals for society and goals within hospital quality control issues. So sort of in the administrative capacity of things.
So set priorities. So Islamic bioethics will help set priorities for healthcare institutions who want to
sort of keep in line with
societal needs.
Social needs.
Okay. So like the Catholic healthcare system wants to have a Catholic responsibility to care for it. Yeah?
Right, exactly.
Okay. Because you're a Catholic faith.
Exactly.
Alright.
Yes.
Alright. Okay. Two more things and then we'll move on. So what is Islamic? I'm not gonna write this down. But since we're talking about Islamic bioethics, I need to know what you think is Islamic. Wow.
It's a big question.
Good. All right. So fine. What is bioethics? All right. Okay. All right. So let me talk. So I'm gonna share with you a little bit of a narrative of my own. Since Sahar reminded me of my days at Cornell, so I want to tell you how I got involved or interested in this sort of stuff for a second. Then we're going to go and I want to try to define for you what Islamic bioethics is. So that's the conceptual part. And then we're going to talk about the controversies, which is, I think, in this human dynamic that you all mentioned here. And if I have a chance, inshallah, I'm going to touch on this first, because I think it helps clarify some things for us. So Sahar and I went to Cornell Medical School, not too far from here. So when I went to Cornell Medical School, we had one of the world's premier bioethicists, Joe Finns, who is part of the faculty there. You may or may not have heard of him, but he's done a lot of work actually with the Jewish community because his wife is the assistant rabbi at Emmanuel Temple, which is the most wealthiest temple in the country. Okay, and the Orthodox Jews. So she's a rabbi at a temple, so that tells you that that's not an Orthodox temple. But in any case, the Orthodox Jewish community, and there's much relations with that in Cornell. So Joe Finns has done a lot of work initially on this idea of what I will call accommodation. So the idea of where does religion enter the healthcare system. One of the ways is through ethical decision making. And so Joe asked me, a second year medical student, when this is right before Shaiba or maybe around that time, he says, "Oh, Aasim, yeah, you're Muslim, right? Yeah, okay. So tell me what Islam has to say about, taking a feeding tube out of a patient at the end of life, or about prison resident state." And I said, "Aren't you the bioethicist? Why are you asking me?" He's like, "I don't know. You're the Muslim. You should tell me from the Muslim perspective." And I knew that I had no answers, and I said, "Okay, well." Maybe this is how he's trying to push that religion might enter the healthcare system by thinking about it ethically. So in that search, I said, okay, well, does Islam have anything to say about anything in medicine? Isn't medicine a sort of a practice we all agree upon? Because when I go to Pakistan and I'm in Al Khan University, the medicine there seems to be the same as the medicine at Cornell. Yes, we have much more access to things, but it looks the same. So what does Islam have to say about anything here? And then maybe 15 years later, or how many years, 10 years, 12 years, many years later, then I came to better understand. Many years later, I said, well, maybe there should be something that Islam says about bioethics, right? So Islam, if there is a bioethics, maybe there is something Islamic about it or not Islamic about it. So with that said, in today's khutbah, I was trying to provoke some thoughts about the use of reason within our own deliberations about otherworldly afterlife goals. Because I think it has to, when we talk about ethics, we have to understand what discourse is taking place to be able to say anything about Islam within it. Okay? So that's the kind of the preface of my talk. So let's talk about Islamic bioethics for a second. So when I talk about Islamic bioethics, or when I try to talk about Islamic bioethics, I think if something's Islamic, it must be connected to the tradition of Islam. And when I talk about the tradition of Islam, I mean the way that Islam has been as a community, has been carried by a community of individuals who claim to be Muslim. That's one way of thinking about Islamic, right? So if you think about, well, what is Islam, or how Islam has been interpreted, it has been carried through generations, right? So people will tell you that, that something is part of Islam, not part of Islam. And if you think about the billions of people who have been Muslim in this world, right? And if you were to say that's the denominator of everybody who's called themselves Muslim and died as a Muslim, then the things which are all common to them could be thought of as Islamic. Why am I saying that? Because today, when we look at Islam with Western eyes, we think we have come up with something new oftentimes. We say that, look, the hermeneutical theory that was used to interpret the Quran was inconsistent and thought about by these people, and today we have a new theory based on some new understanding. But what it rejects at times is the fact that there is millions of people, or billions of people, who understand a certain verse a certain way. There was a reason that they did so, and there was a community that carried that tradition forth. And while you might have, I don't want to say it's not Islam, you might have a new thought, but it has to be thought about, it has to be assessed by what that community of people have thought about. So you have the Quran, and then you have Mufassirin, as someone mentioned here, right? So commentators. So that something to be Islamic needs to have a linkage to what was Islam as a tradition, as understood by those millions of people in a certain way across time. There must be a connectedness and rootedness to it. Otherwise, it's not Islamic. Right? Otherwise, it's not Islamic. So particularly, and this I'll get closer to the idea. So if you're talking about Islam, we all know, or many people would know, and many people say that the Quran is an essential aspect of Islam. Right? That without the Quran, maybe Islam doesn't exist. Without the Prophet, maybe Islam doesn't exist. So the sources of knowledge about this world and hereafter have to involve the Quran and Sunnah. Then we get to the idea of what is law and ethics, which I'll get into part 2 here. So there must be a connectedness to the tradition, meaning the people of the tradition, the bearers of tradition, and 2, it must recognize the sources of understanding tradition, right, being Quran and Sunnah. I'm not saying every aspect, but because those 2 things define Islam for all those people that come after. Without the Quran, there could be no Islam. Without the Prophet ﷺ, there would be no Islam, right? So that rootedness within tradition must define an Islamicness. So let me show you something that isn't Islamic necessarily. So I differentiate Islamic bioethics from Muslim bioethics. How? So Islamic bioethics here has a rootedness in tradition. A Muslim bioethics is what do Muslims do. Now you and I know that many times when we act, we might do something that has nothing to do with Islam at all. Right? Or actually might be contradictory to what Islam tells us to do. So by looking at people, a sociological study of people, you will get at what Muslims practice, which may not be what Muslims ought to do. Right? It might not be what Muslims ought to do. So that will be Muslim bioethics, not Islamic bioethics. Because when a person, a human, when Islam becomes an embodied practice in a Muslim, there might be 10 different things that a Muslim might be thinking about when they're doing something. What my mom says, what the lawyers are going to say, what the healthcare system says, what I'm feeling at this time, right? There might be 10 different or more things that motivate a human actor to act. One component may or may not be Islam, but it doesn't get to you at Islamic bioethics. 1, distinction. 2, bioethics. Okay, here's we'll talk about the Quran and Sunnah for a second. So, ethical theory, or ethical theories, today in the modern age, and particularly in the field of bioethics, have a component of man looking at man. Okay? And in Islamic bioethics, it would not be man looking at man. So what do I mean? So today, in the hospital, we have ethics committees. And we judge our peers upon whether what they're doing is ethical. Meaning that the community of humans, or in this case, the community of physicians, or lawyers, or chaplains, whoever is on that ethics committee, judges such and such an act to be ethical. Right? That it is within the accepted standards of society, or this specialized group within society. And the Greek notion of ethics comes from that. Man vis-a-vis man. Can we, as a community, understand, whatever that community resides, what is ethical? But you notice we don't talk about what is good ethics or bad ethics. What is good ethics? So you can be acting ethically, but it's bad ethically. You're acting ethically bad. But we don't have this good ethics and bad ethics committee. We have an ethical committee because we're just thinking what a sound mind of people from various traditions and thoughts would agree upon as something that is within the bounds of what we agree upon. So the judgment, right? So if you think about ethics from that standpoint, you have a human who's being judged by another human, and the source of knowledge for that human is another human. Vis-a-vis Islamic bioethics, where ethical theory in Islam does not have an idea of human, well, I'll explain further, but does not have that humans are adjudicating other humans. Rather, mankind stands before God. Alright? Man stands before God. And the reason man stands before God is because the ramifications are not actually really that interesting in this world. But the real interesting thing is what happens in the afterlife. Right? So to judge upon an ethical thought process, which is good ethically, we have to understand what is good and what is bad. And how do we understand what is good and bad? Who is the reference? That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said. Or Rasulullah has said. So an Islamic bioethical theory must address, if it is to be called Islamic, the idea and the role of what? I said Quran and Sunnah. Must address the idea of the Quran and Sunnah. Because those are the only ways that we have any access to divine pleasure or displeasure in the afterlife. Okay? The only access. Because if a Muslim is concerned about what advice I give to another Muslim, the metric for assessing that advice is, well, will that raise or lower their station in the hereafter? Now, now I want to pause. So this is the main dominant discourse within the Islamic tradition about ethics. It doesn't reside at the level of ethics, because ethics is not known. There's no such thing as ethics within the Islamic tradition. Because there is no idea of concept of man judging man. Rather, you have the idea of obligation. So, if you have rights that Allah has mandated, actually huquq al-ibad comes through the rights of Allah. But in any case, the idea that you are being judged according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said. And when you have relationships and social relations between man and man, they are too given, in many cases, by God, decreed by God. Right? Yeah. So this is the idea that there is always this reference. So the distinction between a moral philosophy embedded within bioethics as contemporary bioethics vis-a-vis Islamic bioethics is that there is always an added component of religion. But here, not religion, but the idea that there's God intervening. That the referent and the judge, the reference for what is ethical and the judge for what is ethical is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the divine communication as captured through the Quran and the Sunnah must be part of that ethical theory. But how do you get at what does the Quran and what does the Sunnah say? How? That's why it has to be Islamic, right? So it must be accessed through the understanding of a community. The community that carried with it both the oral and the written communication. That was interpreted and thought about for 1400 years. So anybody cannot just propose an Islamic bioethics. Rather, you can only have access to that understanding because it's part of the community. Okay, so there's a lot of things to think about here. But why it's very interesting is that this is a conceptual challenge of Islamic bioethics. Because what happens in all this discourse is that we have a lot of different actors with a lot of different tools and a lot of different goals and a lot of different consumers who want different things. And since everybody is so different, we never ever understand what Islamic bioethics is. Right? So let me give you an example. So you have a mufti and faqih. Okay? So you say, I need to go and figure out whether I can have this heart transplant that's from a porcelain mouth. The faqih says, okay, I'm going to go and do my thing and understand the text and understand the fatwa, and I'm going to tell you, Jews, it's fine. Okay? You say, khalas, okay, I'm done, alhamdulillah. So now you're done in mufti faqih. But the mufti faqih, his sources and methodology to understand Islamic bioethics is legalistic only, right? The texts that he's reading have nothing to do with the texts produced by Imana, or the books written by PhDs, or the sociological phenomenon of how Muslims think and act. Similarly, so you see the whole? So then the other way. So you have Muslims who are just studying, people who are studying Muslims. So you go to Egypt and you say, I want to understand in Egypt how we think about organ transplantation. So I interview everybody related to organ transplantation in the country. And I try to understand what they're doing. But by thinking about what they're doing, I cannot get at what is Islamic, because I am not using the reference of the tradition, how the muftis have thought about, how the mufassirin have thought about these ayat, and how the other people in medicine or making policy have thought about it. So I only get part of the whole. So why is this verse very important? And I want to open up, inshallah, and I want to talk about two more things, and then let me get to this verse. So the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ويسألونك عن الخمر والميسر قل فيهما, right? خمر وميسر, alcohol and gambling. قل فيهما إثم كبير. Say in it is evil, كبير, great. ومنافع للناس. However, within it there is benefit for mankind. Right? That's the first part of the verse. So Allah subhanahu is talking about these two things, khamar wa maisir. Right? And He says that there is sin, great sin within it, but there is benefit for mankind. وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِنْ نَفْعِهِمَا. However, the sin, and then they ask you, the verse continues, that that although there is benefit, the ithm in those two things, the sin in those two things, akbar, not akthar, I'll explain about that. Akbar min nafi'ima. That the sin in it is greater than the benefit within it. And this is the basis for the prohibition of drinking alcohol, or the use of alcohol, as someone says, not just like right? And gambling. Now, the reason I say this is very important is because I want you to pay attention to what is being compared. Okay? And many times when we look at the service level reading, we're not sometimes paying attention to the terms used. So the comparison here is ithm, sin. Sin is of this world or the afterworld. Next slide. أكبر من نفعهما أثم كبير ومنافع للناس. And there is benefit للناس. Where the nas people live. Benefit where? This world. So the comparison here is afterlife and this life. Right? إثمهما أكبر من نفعهما. So the sin in it is greater than the benefit in it. So the comparison here is, okay, in this world, you think, as people say, some alcohol studies, we know that if the French diet and you reduce cardiovascular risk and all this stuff, right? Yeah, Allah subhanahu, okay, good, you have benefit for men. But the sin is greater. Huh? But not greater in what sense? The term here says akbar. So now we pray, we say Allahu Akbar. Now can you tell me, what does that mean, Allahu Akbar? God is great. Yeah, no, really, what does it mean? Greater. Greater than what? Meaning you cannot fathom what Allah SWT is. Greater. Yani this is beyond your capacity to think what Allah SWT is. So when you are praying and you're doing sujood and ruku and you're saying, I'm thinking about something in my mind, my attention has gone this way. Allahu Akbar. Whatever you're thinking is nothing. Allah is greater than that. Or if you're doing go and fiqh about that verse, Allahu Akbar. That verse is great, alhamdulillah, but Allahu Akbar. Meaning that there is no comparison, Allahu Akbar. So here when Allah says Akbar min, not Akthar min. Akthar min, if you were to wager and count up the benefits and the harms, you could think about it. I can think about it. I can compute it. But the verse doesn't talk about computation at all. Because you're weighing the scale of the afterlife to this world, and you cannot think about the afterlife. You can't. Only through divine communication. The only reason you can understand that this is bad for you, sinful for you, is because Allah SWT is saying it's sinful for you. Khalas. I don't care what the benefit is in man. Because you can wager that. And if he were to have to use akthar, he would say, well, maybe we can think about it. But the word used, the comparative is akbar. So you can't. And so why I say this verse is very important? Because it points at methodology, goals, right, and actors. So if we talk about bioethics or any ethics, the goal here is we need to reduce ithm. And the way to reduce ithm is not to think about what mankind's effects are. And this verse has to do with manafi, benefit, okay? And in all Islamic bioethics writings, you will see the term masalih, istislah, al-ghurura, rampant. And they're assessing things, and I'm going to get to qualifications in a second, but they're assessing things about benefit and harm. Medicine, when we think about our trade, we think about benefit and harm to patients. Part of this world, which is great. There's no problem with that. But if you're thinking about the metric is to evaluate, right, something about the other life, you have no access to that. Allah is saying this. Akbar min, kabir, ithm, sin. So you cannot equate necessarily benefit to man with good. Because there is benefit, but it is not good. Nor can you equate benefit to man with reward. Because there is benefit, but here there is not reward. Rather, you will need to access the Quran to understand benefit and harm in terms of afterlife, period. So those equations do not work. Okay? So, and the goal of bioethics is to reduce sin. Period. Now, why is this important? So when you read fatwa, which is one source of Islamic bioethics, you will say, well, why is this fatwa saying this is fine, that's fine? Why is the fact that all these fatwa are just saying everything's fine? Malish, yajuz. Why? Because the goal of the mufti, in this case, this actor, is to find a way to reduce the sin upon men. To find a way, within the tradition, to reduce sin. To find a means, right? Because this is not dealing with salah, okay? This is dealing with mankind. To find a way that this is okay. That this doesn't get you into sin in the afterlife. Even if it's makruh, and even if it's makruh, definitely mean, according to hadith. Because the idea is that we want to move you through this prism to lift the sin from mankind. So we might apply and use secondary sources of fiqh. Alright, and we can talk about that if you should want. We might use opinions that are not the dominant opinion of the school to permit something. Because we know that's still within the tradition. And there is no assuredness that this is sinful. And that is the overarching goal of the Mufti Faqih. So when you look at Fatawa, you will not understand what the normative goal of Islam in bioethics is. Rather, what you will understand is how far Muftis go to try to make something not haram. That's it. So those who try to collect compendia of Islamic Fatawa cannot derive the goals that way. One. Okay, that's a challenge. I'm almost done. Alright, so we talked about scholar mufti, now imana, alright, I don't want to talk about imana or books. So we talked about producers, consumers. Okay, so health policy, I want to touch on that. So when you're considering policy level action, right, you're thinking about what is most beneficial to mankind, right? So this is similar to the mufti role. So you're thinking about what's most beneficial to mankind. And in Muslim countries, here's another concept, and then I will close. The idea, and you should know this, that in the Sunni world, that there is the idea of obeying a rule is dependent on this concept of wilaya. Okay? So what is wilaya? You can translate that as authority, governance, but the idea is that when you have a, so when you, the obligation to follow something other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, your ruler, is based on the verse of the Quran, right? That you should follow those who have authority over you, right? But the fact that they have responsibility over you, right? The Rasul has wilaya over us, and the Sahaba have wilaya further down. So when you do not, and this continues on until you get to the level of fatwa. Okay? So if you have a Muslim state, and we can discuss it, but in the sense that if you have a Muslim state, now just we don't want to talk about the conflict, what that means many different things. If you have a Muslim state and a Muslim ruler, and you're a Muslim in that state, if that person or that individual, that body has been given authority over you, and they're following a tradition of Islam, then they are the quasi-adjudicators of what is ethical for you, because they have been given the authority over you. So why was it a big deal that Imam al-Hanbal did not want to follow the Mu'tazila idea of the Quran being created? Because had he done so, then it would be sinful for people to believe that this is not the case. Why? Because once there is a question of what is better or not, at the level of policy, it is upon the Muslim ruler to decide what the policy is from the available options. And if they are not given 10 options and they pick one, whether or not you agree that's the best option, you're obligated to follow it. So a non-Muslim context, a non-majority Muslim context, is very different than a Muslim context. This is controversy 2. So oftentimes in Islamic bioethics, we look at fatwa from the Muslim world. Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan. But understand that not only is the fatwa not getting normative, but what is occurring there in terms of policy is that they are very reticent to obligate anything on Muslims because they know there's a Muslim ruler. Now, depending on your Maliki, Shafi, we can talk all about that. But the point is that if they were to say something, this is fine, and the Muslim ruler were to say this is okay, then if you don't follow, you're sinning. So when you speed here, okay, it's the law of the land. You shouldn't do that. Everyone tells you should follow the law of the land. But if you speed there, and the speeding is related to a matter of benefit of mankind, you sin. If there is a command from a Muslim ruler following the Sharia, there's many different things. But that is the level of we need to get away from this. So when you look at those fatwa and those policies from the Muslim world about abortion, okay, like there's many policies. The Egyptians are dealing with things about organ transplantation. There's many policies. They say, hey, Muslims, it was okay for those fatwa in the Muslim world, that was okay. Why is it not okay over here? Because the construct through which they're dealing with state authority is much different. Much different. Not just the medical system, but the concept of authority within Islamic bioethics. So with that, I give you a lot of things to think about. And I'm not sure that you understand all I said, but that's fine. I want to open up questions so we can clarify something. So I think that when I talk about, or when we think about Islamic bioethics, we have to understand the goal of Islamic bioethics. The goal of Islamic bioethics is to remove sin. How do you figure out what is sinful? Through the Quran and Sunnah. Do you have any other access to that? Potentially you have access to what is beneficial. And if there is nothing in the Quran and Sunnah that says that says there's anything sinful here, you can choose to do what is beneficial. And you have all the access in the world to do that. Physicians, right? Policymakers, scholars, PhD sociologists, you can say anything you want to benefit. But if you raise it to the level this is Islamic, meaning that you are obliged to do so, then you only have access to the Quran and Sunnah. And no, this is a good thing. Is that there's not many things in the Quran and Sunnah that are determinist, right? That are univocal about Islamic bioethics. That there is only one way to do things. So that allows mankind to continue as it is, and to continue to do things, and to have debates and thoughts, and think about what's better or worse, without being sinful. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله ولكم ولسائر المسلمين الله غفور رحيم. So with that, I will open for discussion.
We'll take questions, starting with students, and then moving from there. Osama?
Can I just say that I think characterizing Islamic ethics as not having sort of the suggestion that Islam doesn't recognize an ethics which is just divorced from physical reality, where human beings are discussed. I mean, there are huge debates within the Islamic tradition about that. I was just actually reading a book today, and I've been reading it for a few days, by Andre Iman from University of Toronto,
Yes.
Islamic natural law theories, where...
Yes, and yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I expect you're familiar with
Yes.
this. And so, I mean, the mainstream of Islamic thought has tended to see that ethics can be known by human beings, but obligation is something which comes from God. And so sinfulness is something which arises from God.
Correct. So you're clarifying my statement. So as I said, if there's things in this world about better or worse, ethics in that level you can get at through mind, aql, or consultation, anything else. So that would be typified by Muslim bioethics. But if you say that this is a level of Islamic bioethics, that means that there's an obligation, command, divine communication, right? That requires sinfulness in the hereafter or reward. And then the only way, Maturidi, Mutazilite, legal and side, but Ashari, Maturidi, they all agree, right? In the Sunni world, as I said, that there is only access three. So that's where the reason I say that this is very important is because there's consensus on that. But there's not that many things that you have to worry about consensus for. But when you're living to the level of sin in Islamic, we need to be more particular what terms we're using, right? Because then we're saying that Allah wants to do this. So here's a story from I do health research in the Muslim community around Muslim health. So we had done some interviews with the community around breast cancer. Okay, this is my current research topic. And an interviewee said, you know that imam on the member was saying God wants you to have a mammogram. You should have a mammogram. I don't know what I wasn't at that. Okay, I don't know. He's like, but I don't understand how God would want me to have a mammogram. Where is there anything in the Quran and Sunnah that says God wants me to have a mammogram? Well, I'm not sure that the Imam said God wants you to have a mammogram, but the point is that if he assumed that the Imam on the Mimbar was commanding the group to do something that, because this is going to be, if you don't do it, it's sinful. Right? This is what they were getting at. Right? But I'm sure the Imam didn't mean it that way. But this is what they thought. That when he's on the Mimbar and he's got his coat on, he's saying that Allah says, do this, khalas, you're done. You know, if I don't do it, I'm going to be doing haram things or whatever else it is. This is a problem. Right? So our terms are imprecise. It's good for you to have a mammogram. It will be beneficial for you to have a mammogram. But, you know, if they said or someone interpreted God wants to have a mammogram, then we have a different level of discourse. And so that's why I talked about this issue.
Alright.
Could you talk a little bit about the issue of abortion, how we view that in Islamic context?
Specify further.
Sort of like in certain situations, like when the woman's life is at risk because of the baby, like how should we
So, know that there is much variance around this issue of abortion, but let me kind of give you just the lay of the land for a second. And I think many of you already know this, so nothing will be very special here. But so the issue of abortion is tied to this idea of ensoulment, right? So in my readings, the question becomes that a human is fully human, right? When they're ensouled, not that they don't have life, but they're fully human, culpable for homicide. Right, so there are stories of worrying about the woman he calls miscarriage and she gave them, right? But the idea was that this isn't the level of full human. So after ensoulment, right, that this would be that you're taking a full human life. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says that you cannot, except for fasad fil ard. So you can't do this except for in a way that's permissible. Or that there's great harm to people, right? So the idea of war is to prevent fasad, right? Now, people have had many different ulama over the centuries. This is something that they've dealt with for a long time. But the question becomes, there are some. So I said, let me map out for you what the issues are. So the issue is that there are differences of opinion when the ensoulment occurs. Some starting the same hadith and then the verse in the Quran. Some say 40, some say 120. 120 is the Jamhur opinion across the Sunni schools. 40 is not. But in any case, there are many within all madhab who would say 40 is the day. So 120 days. Now 120 days, not by the calendar that we use in medicine, because we count days after the last menstrual period. Okay? This is from conception. So that's one issue. So if you count the days first, okay. So 120 is fully human. After that point, the boundaries, this is also clear, that that after 120 days, you are not permitted to have an abortion because it's taking a life, a full life, right? Except for darura. Okay, now we'll talk about darura, except for darura. So, and the reason they use this is they move from nas, so as I told you that there is text in the Quran about killing someone. I told you that there is nas, meaning there's hadith about when someone potentially becomes ensouled. There's also in the Quran nas, again, the idea of when the different stages of life are. So you move from nas, right, usul, right, usul fiqh, you move from nas to the idea of how do I do something that is normatively prohibited. And so when you map onto the usul, you have the other two aspects of Islamic fiqh, usul al-fiqh. You have qawaid, right, and you have maqasid. So what they say is, okay, well, we know something univocal, at least has many different narrations, this is impermissible. How do we get to make it permissible? Is through the qawaid, al-dururatu bil-mahdurat, that the necessity predominates over the haram. Haram being clear. So from nas, we know this is a haram, but necessity overrides that. So what is necessity becomes a question. It's not necessity in the terms of our lingo franca here, English necessity, need, want, desire, right? What is necessity? So the understanding of necessity, you go to move to the maqasid. Okay, so now I'm just pointing for you where the agreement is. So when you go into Sunni schools, you talk about maqasid, well, we know that there are certain things that the law is supposed to protect. Right? We all agree, right? Or there's the sixth. Right? But hifz al-din, hifz al-nafs, right? Haya. So the idea that life is something that should be preserved. So all usuli-based thought processes and laws, ahkam, are calibrated by this idea that these are the hierarchical needs of man, right? One of them being life. So when life is at stake, then the darura can you be employed to overturn what is haram from the usul. Agreement, all four Sunni schools. Okay? Got it? So the usul say, the texts say about this 120 days, Jamhur opinion. Then they say, well, you can only overturn this known haram thing by darura qawaid. What do you find what darura is? Go to maqasid. Maqasid says that the thing that we must preserve, deen, we know. Okay, so this is how you get at this idea that is permissible when life's at stake. Now, that is the dominant opinion. But after 120 days. But what happens is that there have been instances, if you read fatawa, of people saying, well, we are not just worried about bodily integrity. So a woman is now in an ICU with heart failure and we need to now do an abortion because she's going to die, right? And if she dies, both she and the baby will die potentially. But rather this has to do with psychological integrity as well. Minor, but there is. And how this was used was in the case of Bosnia. So when you had raping of Muslim women, they had no access to health care before 120 days, or they did not have an ability, or they didn't know they were pregnant, or there was still war going on. So even after 120 days, when we know that this woman will be incapable psychologically of maintaining her health, ulama said it's permissible in certain cases. And this is not something to be used all the time, but they felt that this was that level of darura here. Okay? And this is what I said, that ulama, fatawa, muftis, they're trying to alleviate sin. This is their goal. And you won't say that now the Muslim hospital should say, okay, it's fine, someone feels not happy of having a baby after 120 days. It's fine, permissible, because we have one fatwa. This would be a misappropriation of the fatwa. So those are the bounds. Now there are, before 120 days, everybody has some thoughts of what can or can't be done, because there are different thoughts of what is fully human. This relates to, and you find this within the idea of when is a fetus who is aborted, is miscarried, what is the obligation to do salat janazah upon them or not, right? So you will know this in terms of, is it fully formed, does it make a sound, does it breathe? So based on that, they kind of draw analogies into when you can and cannot and what bar it is. So I'll leave that aside because there's a lot of controversies, but maybe at least I gave you some idea how you got these things. Fadda, go ahead.
Very nice, thank you. Good reflection. There are 2-3 things you didn't bring up, and I kind of want to get some reflection from you on that. One is the role of the gender, male, female, patient, doctor, physician, you have that issue. You have, so haya comes in. Your second in there is Muslim physician, non-Muslim patient. What happened in Ireland, that Hindu dentist could not get abortion because the Irish doctor thought the whole Catholic system over there refuses abortion, and they let her die instead of giving her the option of having an abortion. Then there's another issue that you're bringing out, and I'm curious about it. You keep mentioning Sunni ethics, Sunni bioethics. Is there a distinction between the Sunni and the Shia bioethics? I mean, I never thought there could be any. And then I really want to do a pushback, because you have taken the ayat of Quran and you're basing your entire conversation based on that, but you're not taking, for example, Taha, we did not send this Quran for your constant. You're not using the other ayat, which is there is no compulsion. You're not using the other ayat that those who believe in Allah and the Judgment Day have nothing to fear. So, I mean, there are a whole series of ayat that expand the scope and not restrict in any way. And those are more general purpose. And the one you picked is very limited, very specific, and you are taking that and turning it the whole thing around on its head on bioethics.
Good. So let me repeat those very long. So the first question you had was about gender, and I'm not sure what you meant about gender.
Well, you have a male doctor and a female patient, and parts may be exposed.
Yes.
The whole process of haya comes in,
Yes.
and vice versa.
Yes.
So that, what's your thoughts on that, or you have no thoughts on it?
I can have many thoughts. I'm not sure what you're getting at, but in the sense that maybe I think you're asking the question of whether this is something that Islamic bioethics has something to say about. And I'll say that there are numerous fatawa, numerous thoughts. This is something that from the early hospitals that Muslims came up with. This is something that was always thought about how this is going to happen. And so there is a long history of being able to examine women and men cross-genderally for the idea that you need to preserve their health, even though in other social circumstances that would not be something that would be considered to be the best ideal situation. So I think that there's, and I've actually written a paper on this, but it just kind of walks us through how people have thought about this idea of something that is normatively not permitted, or potentially normatively not permitted, but it is. So I don't think there's much controversy around that. maybe there is, and I'm not aware of it, but I think that many Muslim hospitals around the world, that this is something that, and for a long time we've been dealing with it, this is something that we don't need to necessarily talk much more about. The second thing you asked was non-Muslim and Muslim patient. So I think this is a very interesting thing, because this idea has to do with policy as well, and you mentioned Ireland in that context, that in the United States it's a question about freedom of conscience, which is what, and why this happens in Ireland is because Catholics, there's a thought of what conscience is in Catholic legal theory, moral theory. So can you do something, or can you not do something that you believe is morally, that you're morally culpable for, right? So you have a higher idea, like here. So I say Allah says this is, I can't do this. Now what are your responsibilities? So I think in our context, and this is why I said Islamic bioethics might have a different color and shade potentially in a non-Muslim majority state than a Muslim majority state, because this is the question. The healthcare system has different goals. There are things that we might feel that we are objectionable, but the people that we're serving might not. And what is our responsibility to them? I will say the shortcut answer to that is that, again, in Sunni, and we'll get to the Sunni Shia in a second. So in the Sunni world, the Hanafi school actually is the has most dealt with the idea of authority, legal authority, and how the relationships work. And then through that prism, which is why we all hear this idea, you should obey the law of the land. This is a preponderance of Sunni legal theory through the Hanafi school, okay, in a non-Muslim state. So this is what I would say is a shortcut, that if the law of the land says you need to refer someone to do something, then you refer. And the law is not just law, and this is policy. Our guild, our physician societies tell us sometimes you have to refer, you have a duty to refer. So you do that. Now the question becomes in the UK, where physicians are seen not just as independent contractors in the healthcare system, but rather tools of the state. Okay? That we are providing healthcare to all. That's a tool, that's a state responsibility, and you're a tool of the state. You have no necessarily autonomous regulation of your own practice except for what we say. There we have some room for debate, which is why in Ireland and other places where there's national healthcare systems, there's a lot of debate about what conscience has to say. But here in the States, President Bush Jr. did a lot of stuff around conscience. So there's much more leeway here. A good book is by Robert Fisher on this topic specifically, related to healthcare. 2, 3, Sunni Shia. So I wanted to talk about what I'm familiar with and I are literature in and not what I'm not. And there is much, and those probably some in this room will have much more to say on than I do. But the Shia world is or has been much more progressive in their thought processes of the role, and this is theologically rooted, of benefit and harm in this world and access to that ultimate benefit and harm in the afterlife by rationality. Right? So one of their sources in the Jafri school and sources of law is pure reason opposite. It is changed. But as you know, they also have different ideas of what is sunnah, or actually particularly what hadith are qualified to be hadith. And so based on that, and they have this idea of maraja and walayat al-faqih. Right? So when you have a living faqih, maraja, and he says something, you are sinful if you do not follow it. And until he dies, you cannot change that, because this is your guy. So for example, and I'll give you a clear example. So this Shi'i world in end of life, since this is something that we want to talk about tomorrow, we believe, most of the fatwa you read will say that we have no determinacy of what is occurring near the end of life, meaning that when there is a question of whether this person is living or dead, what's communication is occurring, that we have no nasi text to really tell us what to do. Therefore, we defer many times to physicians to help us think about. Right? So this is how brain death, in certain ways, became accepted. It's still controversial in the Muslim world. The idea that we are not the experts of this. And we have a concept of quality of life in a sense. So the idea of being mukallaf and having taklif is a marker, and there's another paper that's coming out on this, is a marker of a full life. Okay? Not that people have lesser lives, but the idea that you should be, if you're going to gain reward and sit in the hereafter, You need to have the ability to think about that. And the longer you can think about that and gain reward and raise your station hereafter, that is a quality life. Okay? Now, I'm saying there are thoughts on this line. In this Shi'i world, there's no thoughts on this. Every life, every signal of life existing is of infinite value, similar to the Catholic theory. So, to withdraw life support would be considered a sin. Because as long as there are markers of life present, we cannot adjudicate whether this is a quality life or not. That's why I don't talk about Shi'i, because I don't know much more than these things that I've heard from people and read and whatever else it is. That suffices, I hope. Now the fourth thing, I think the bigger question is why I use this verse and not all the other verses. So the reason I use this verse is because it is a cornerstone in Maturidi ethics about evaluation of afterlife in this life. And clearly in this verse it talks about benefit in this life versus sin in the afterlife. And you can draw from this verse itself, the idea of benefit does not equate to reward in the afterlife. Because this verse clearly says that there is benefit in something that has sin in the afterlife.
I'm sorry, the one that says those who fear Allah and
لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. There's like 4 verses now. But you're asking why I use this verse, so let me at least address that. So this verse allows for this analogy of the weighing of 2 scales, this life and the hereafter. Now and there are many verses. This is, as I said, this is one of the verses that is used in a concept of life. How can we evaluate otherworldly consequences? And this is not the only verse, and there are not the only hadith, and there's a whole system of thought process to this. I just wanted to show you an analogy. Now the idea that there are many other verses, I agree with you, that there are many other verses that think about a lot of different things and talk about a lot of different things. But I am not in a position to propound a theory of Quranic ethics. I'm not an expert in Quranic ethics, nor do I know all of the tafasir that relates to certain ayat, nor do I know the different understandings of the terms used in that verse ad nauseum. So I think that, and this is what I said, I think that when we try to understand something, that for Islamic bioethics, the soundest way to approach that is through the bearers of the tradition. Not that they are not wrong or faulty, but rather they have had the task and the tools to understand things at a level that perhaps I might not. So there might be people who can use those verses to derive a normative theory of sin and harm in bioethics vis-a-vis this world and the hereafter. I am just not capable of doing so.
Since you brought up in your answer that you were going to talk about end of life stuff tomorrow, I feel kind of bad asking this question, so I'm not going to be here tomorrow. But based on what you had said earlier about abortion, and how do you, and also that you postulated that the ideas of the faqih on this topic have been always to try to establish things that are definitely not haram. So many things have been sort of said that this is not, you're not being punished for these things in the afterlife. So when we talk about end of life care, with those things being said, a lot of things are not addressed. So this leaves a lot open to debate. Kind of, if you can give it in a nutshell, is there really anything that we can say with any kind of from a perspective of the clinician to family members, or is there anything that the imam can say? Because often this is the conflict that comes up, is that we have, I've been in situations where entire communities have been against the clinician, and they've been sort of riled up by the imam, who, well-meaning, is trying to, defend the quote-unquote Islamic position on this subject.
So I think I can't answer your question in this short time period, but I think that I'll just clarify something that you said. So the Mufti is always trying to figure out what is unequivocally haram, so that he can advise people, this is haram, I have no way out for you except that this is haram. Okay? But there is a golden fatwa by Ibn Taymiyyah about drinking, okay, but there's haram, okay? And everything else is an approximation to what would happen. So when you move from law to ethics, another thing happens in Islamic tradition, where you don't say so you go from what can't I do to what ought I do, okay? And this is a distinction that, again, we kind of lose sometimes. So what I can't do might be clear, but what I ought to do might not be clear. And our ethical discussions also occur at this level. And the imams occurs at this level. So I think it's beneficial for you to do this in this state because it is a reformatory paradigm for you, or for your family. There are other considerations here, or whatever else it might be. So the idea of what ought I do is almost never clear. And that's why I think that what happens is that what ought I do is not answered by the physician, but someone who has a relationship with an imam or a chaplain might say that I trust this guy for my deen, and he's telling me what I ought to do, and I think he's very important to me, and so I'm going to do what he tells me because that's what I ought to do. And he can tell me what I cannot do. But the physician may be not that close, right? And the physician shouldn't be telling you what ought you should do in the matters of religion. You can tell what ought you do in terms of medicine, right? Unless you're a dual. But you shouldn't be saying what ought you do, right, in terms of your afterlife ethics. So does that make sense? Maybe it helps. But we can just, inshallah, I can give you my card and we can talk about this further.
Arshi, Kujeji, sister here.
What are your thoughts on organ donation?
Thoughts? I have no thoughts. I don't think about it much since I'm not transmissive. There's much variance. I don't know. Are you asking me what this mapping of what is known and not known?
I mean, how would you advise someone who comes to you and says, should I sign the back of my driver's license?
I would say that pick an opinion that an authority that you trust, and then do that. That's what I'd say.
Does niyat play any role in all of this?
Niyat in what sense?
Your intention, like if your intention is that maybe someone can benefit from my organ.
Well, I think that's fine. So obviously every deed that you do, no matter the amount of niyat, so you should be thinking about your intention. So I think that if someone's thinking of an altruistic nature, that you should do this, that's fine. If you say that my, the India, the Fatwa Council of XYZ said that this is not permissible, that's fine. But you should also know that again, looking at fatwa, as I said, they're contextually driven. And so there are many aspects of organ transplantation that are not addressed by the fatwa. Decision making, what organs, right? So they talk about blank, they say there's benefit. But I know that the benefit of an eye transplant, how long it lasts, a retinal transplant, how long it lasts versus a kidney, versus what, there's much finer detail I can give you about what benefits is there or not. And the other man say, well, if there's benefit, you can. So I think it becomes very granular at the ground level. And oftentimes we need to think about that, but find a trusted authority, follow what they say.
My question is kind of specific, but it's on when Hurricane Katrina hit and the issue with Memorial Hospital, when they decided to euthanize those patients that, they were basically on life support, so, and they had to evacuate and there was no power, so some of the argument was made is that if they would have kept those patients still on life support, but knowing that the power, there was no power, that they were gonna pretty much die in pain. So I guess the staff there decided to mercy kill them and euthanize them because they felt that I guess there was no other way. So I don't know. It was just something I'm really interested in, and I just wanted to know what is an Islamic perspective on that. How do you weigh one life more than the other, because they evacuated those patients who had a greater chance to live than those who were on life support. So what is Islamic's role in that?
So if I'm familiar with that case, and I think the case you're speaking about, they actually didn't call it it wasn't necessarily euthanasia or mercy killing, but the question, so that the case, the physician who did that was thinking in a sort of sense of what to do, and she's on trial now, right? So there's still a debate as to whether this was actually a volitional activity of giving extra doses of medication versus an omission. And this is a distinction that is in Catholic theory, omission versus commission. So if you commit something, are you liable? Or if you don't do it, where you're not liable. So withdrawal life support is the same as withholding life support. Right? So you're committing an act versus I am withholding an act. And there are two thought processes on this. So it gets very complex, but the idea that this is the crux of the matter, whether there's commission or omission. And the evaluation of whether there's commission or omission depends upon whether you see the entire care experience as a series of different acts or as one act. So I went into a contract to take care of you through your duration of your illness, whatever happens through that is based on that initial sort of aspect, or is it that every decision I make in the care of a patient has its own valuation? So it's complex, and there is much more work to be done. So that case, I think it still is up in the air, but it depends on what we would think about in these sorts of ways.
My question was more generic. You basically talked about Islamic bioethics and Muslim bioethics. Is there a way to establish Islamic bioethics? Because from what all I hear is basically you can find a way to, justify anything. And you'll get the muftis, you'll get the fatwas. I mean, every group, every ideology has a different culture or a different way to interpret things.
Yeah.
And even if you take you talked about the Sunnah. Shias have a different interpretation, Sunnis have a different interpretation. You can't even get the legitimacy of the Sunnah. So if you only take the Quran, how many people need Arabic? How many of us know how to interpret it in the way it should be? So again, we depend on the man, so it's interpretive, right? And it depends on the agency doing it. So is there a way to establish an Islamic bioethics, or is it only Muslim?
So I think that, very good. So I think that what I was trying to point out here is the concepts and the controversies, right? So there are concepts that I want to give you, and controversies around what those concepts mean and how they are played out. I do think, otherwise I wouldn't be where I am, that there is an ability to propound an Islamic bioethics rooted within a theological tradition that has implications upon the level of fiqh, right? So and I think that sort of work, just like much other work in our community, has been stilted, how this fits and starts, not readily accessible at times to those of us living in the West who don't have access to different languages. So I think that, and those issues of authority, so all those things that you think about in Muslim community, issues of language, authority, they all map onto this field. But I do think that there is a way to take what we call pre-usul ideas, because usul rests on this idea of an after-worldly wager. And that's how you get fiqh. And all the fiqh, if you say there are 13 sources of Sunni fiqh, Allah accepted, but 8 of them have to use your mind. I mean, you can't interpret the Quran, right? I mean, you have to use your mind, so no one's saying don't use your mind. But the idea is that you are making approximations of what gets to divine pleasure. So I do think that there would be a way to first draw theory to influence the fiqh, right? So for example, let me give you an example so this makes sense. So shifa, right, is healing. Physicians would say that I'm in the healing profession. And if you're in the healing profession, then you're carrying out this idea of I am giving people shifa, right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, one of the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Shafi, right? So He's the one who gives healing. So you're acting as an agent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you think about the word, the term Shafi, and that explanation of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is it is characterized as a Jamali term, Jamali Jalali. There's two different Arabic. So there's a specific. There are many different characterizations of the characteristics of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. Some of them are awe-inspiring. Some of them are kind of this thought of as this sort of beautification idea of what Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is, like generosity, or in this case, one who heals. And when that term in the Quran of shifa is used, it's used in 3 places. And in those 3 places, there are 2 of them are talking about, they have this idea of rahmah as well, this idea of mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And it talks about the Quran. So in the sense that the Quran shifa wa rahmah, meaning that the Quran is a healing and a guidance for mankind. So if you were to say, well, if we're going to embody the characteristic of being a healer according to our understanding what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is as a healer, then the medicine that we provide and the means that we do so might have to have a characteristic of being merciful. And therefore, in all the fiqh rulings and in the therapies we use, we must have that characteristic, otherwise we're not actually embodying the characteristics of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What I'm showing to you is that there is a way to construct a theory which would then influence the fiqh and influence health policy. And unfortunately, as I said, these sorts of things and dialogues occur in a stilted fashion and not holistically. But I remain hopeful that, at least in this context, we should be able to get people who can do that. And it's not the only way to think about it, but provides us a morality or a philosophical basis for the practice of medicine, as opposed to just relying on fatwa, which is fine, which is what we're at this stage in our community. But we might be able to do something better, potentially, and not to replace it, but to give a calibration to it.
Yeah, I understand that, but in terms of Islamic, right? I mean, Islam itself is so divided. I mean, there are sects and different things. How are you going to bring them all together?
I'm not sure there's a goal to bring them all together.
But then, how can you say it's Islamic? I mean, then you're doing it from the Sunni perspective, and then how about the Shia perspective?
An Islamic approach to the practice of medicine, not the Islamic approach. There's never been, I think, anything that you're on that aside from Quran and Qasr Sunnah. Or Rasulullah has agreed upon for the last 400 years. So I'm not sure we should aim for that in Islamic ethics.
There you go.
Dr. Faith. I just want to make an additional comment. There is nothing, I just want to point out, and Aasim will agree, there is nothing special about Islamic or Sunni or Shia bioethics that creates a controversy. Medical ethics and medical decision making has an endless degree of thought-provoking points on a day-to-day basis and sort of as a general thing too.
Yes.
So thoughts of end-of-life care, withdrawal of care, abortion, definitions of life, definitions of death. These are all essentially going to continue to be controversial topics. I think Aasim is showing us as ethicists in non-Islamic conditions try to show us a thought process of how to go about answering these very difficult questions. And I think we'll agree that predominantly any of these questions this thought process has to be applied on a case-by-case basis.
Exactly.
So I don't see ever having any type of written, succinct answer to every one of these questions.
Exactly.
But
Yes, exactly.
I think scholars, medical ethicists, and those such as Aasim are working to put together a thought process to be able to go through on a case-by-case, question-by-question basis. Not just for physicians to be able to advise, but patients and families to understand how to make those decisions. And I lastly want to point out that decisions on medical management and withdrawal of management, withholding of management, etc., is never and should never, and maybe that's the case that's on trial now. It's never a unilateral decision on the part of the physician. Physicians are just as much sort of the victims of the condition as our patients, and it's sort of a coming together in joint decision-making process.
Dr. Nadeem and then Dr. Sultan.
Well, back to the wonderful talk. Maybe a silly rhetorical point that I'm bringing up, or just a comment, or just a question on this matter. But with regards to the primary focus of Islamic bioethics, that it is to remove sin or to limit sin. How, and of course, and all derivative forms. How would we apply this in this situation where I believe in Islamic tradition it is commonly understood, and maybe I'm correct in this, that in terms of suffering, whether it's suffering in life or suffering towards their death, or coming to their impending death, that it can be an expiation for their sins. So, how does the principle of removing sin in Islamic ethics apply to situations where the actual suffering, can be considered a means of removing their sins in the hereafter, but of course in this world of the dunya, in this world, the goal of the ethics is really to help to remove suffering in the sense of bring rahmah and mercy. That is what we're compelled to do as people. At least in the ethics of the man vis-a-vis God, as providing, as acting on his advice, which is providing mercy, but at the same time, on the other end, could it consider it as something as to, it may not help them expiate their sins.
Very good, very good. So, a very important question. So I think that there are a few things that we should bear in mind and maybe clarify your thoughts on. So, one is that when you think about ethical, so let's just I'll move from terms of ethics to say law for a second. Okay. So when you're thinking about making a decision on what the ahkam might be in a certain scenario, you have to understand who the actor is. So if you say, I, as a physician, have the ability to do such and such for my patient, the analysis of what the physician cannot do, which would be therefore sinful, might be different than what the patient, if you look from the patient lens, what the patient can or cannot do, right? And there are areas where that Venn diagram would coincide and not coincide. So the question of the question of what the hukum is must be vis-a-vis a particular agent. Now, the reason I say that is because you will find that this question, so you're talking about suffering being expiation for the sins of the patient. The question is, as a physician, am I allowed or not allowed to do this, right? It's a different question because you're not expiating your sins. The question is whether you will be sinful, right? So the agent of action is the physician, not the patient. And the answer, therefore, might be different. And but however, you will not find too many people who will say that it is haram to try to be healthier and not be ill. Okay? Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu did not seek treatment for an ailment. And it was in the Islamic medieval thought process of when you are liable to seek treatment, they say that seeking treatment, medical treatment, is not fardh, except for in the case where you know that treatment is going to be, you have an ability to cognate that this is probably going to be beneficial to you, okay, to prevent your death. Because then the chain of action is that you are actually allowing something to happen, you're almost committing suicide, that way. So that is the only place where it becomes obligatory and the patient would sin. So you cannot say, I am suffering to expiate my sins. Rather, this is Jamhur opinion, this is a consensus that you can't think about it. So I think that we have to figure out who the agent is and then advise. But I think the question that you're raising about suffering is pertinent to the extremities of life. Right? So and when we don't have treatments, like, or we're trying the 5th regimen of chemotherapy that is not known to prove anything, known to benefit anything, should we or should we not? And then that's not really a question of Islam, it's a question of, it's kind of a question, other things, motivations might then make your decision for you.
Last question.
Yeah, I think this point is very interesting because the Quran says that your body is like a trust to you and you should safeguard it. And if there's a need for the body to be treated, then it ought to be my obligation to get the proper treatment. So how can we say that getting treatment is not obligatory on a Muslim? And second question is related to all these artificial means of prolonging the life. What do you think of it?
So if I might wager, I don't think there's any verse in the Quran that says that your body is I don't think that such a verse exists.
Well,
so let me just...
Let me explain. The verse says that each part of your body will testify against you on the day of judgment, which obviously means how good care of that part did you take.
So the thing that you're mentioning, both of those things are a hadith, with many commentaries on what the hadith means. It does not mean what it obligates you to do. So I think when you're thinking about obligation from a nas, from a text from the Quran and Sunnah, that we must make we must not read beyond what the text is actually saying. If you're going to command someone to do something, you might suppose something says something, which is fine. So I'll say that this is not an opinion of mine. if you go through the classical legal manuals. And the reason why, because you would not say that Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhu, when he was poisoned, were people who were sinning. They were the closest to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If they decided, even at the time when they were dying, to not seek treatment, then they would be bad Muslims. And hold on one second, let me just finish. So the understanding of how can there be a command that Umar radiallahu anhu and Abu Bakr did not apply, did not do themselves. So when you read a hadith, you need to see how the Sahaba, who are the also explainers of the hadith, applied that. Before you decide what was a normative, what was a practice, and what was something that was okay to not do. So I'm just giving you this idea that there is much more to it, and it's not something that I've come up with, but I can refer to the sources where this is clearly demarcated. The other thing I think you mentioned was the idea of prolonging life. And I'll tell you that no treatment prolongs life. Because in our Aqidah would say that your time comes when it comes. Yeah. You can't bring it before and you can't take it after. So I think that this is something we, alhamdulillah, can bypass totally. That your sa'ad will come, khalas, you're going to die, whether it be dying because it's just going to die. We're all dying, and alhamdulillah, we're all going to die. Right? We should just prepare for death now. So I think that this is what I mean by the theological, philosophical basis, right? When you are a Jew, so what happens is that I think this is very important for this reason, that we're using an empirical science of medicine that has studies that posits a deterministic probability, right? It's probabilistic. Statistics probabilistic. This is going to happen, this is not going to happen. I know that this treatment, if I give it to 200 people, beta blockers, 200 people need to take beta blockers for 10 years, right, to prevent one possible myocardial infarction, which may or may not lead to the death. I mean, there's 3-4 different things that's happening with statistics. And when statistics and empirical science enters the Islamic equation, we need to understand where that is falling into the equation before we start applying it willingly, right? So while there's much latitude for us to think about medical science and use empiricism and use a brain, when we're talking about this is what you cannot do and what you must do, that there's just a higher level of we need to kind of be very high level of evidence to do that. So I think that there's no issue. Prolongation of life. Do what you can do, should do, ought to do, but just don't do what you cannot do.
Okay, well, that concludes our formal part of the evening. Thank you, Dr. Aasim, for coming all the way from Chicago to be with us. And inshallah, we hope to have you back, and we hope to have more conversations about these critical issues. The next event for us about Islamic conversation is March 29th, when we're going to talk about Sufi ethics with Dr. Jasser Auda, who's coming all the way from Qatar for this talk, so you don't want to miss it. And he'll be here for 4 days. He'll be here Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Over the weekend, he'll do a seminar, and on Monday, he'll give a talk on Islamic law between revival and reform in the modern world. So that'll be interesting as well. So keep your eyes open for that.
And when you see Jasser, tell him I said this. Jasser and I have some conversations about this first. So tell him Aasim was talking about this.
Thank you.
Thank you.